Hi, I'm Shannon Torrance, and this is Magic is Real. Today, my interview is with Peter Panagore. Peter is not only an amazing, warm, and lovely person, he also has a gift for eloquently putting into words that which most people would agree is a wordless concept. The events that led to Peter's first near-death experience are incredible on their own, but the insights and the wisdom that he returned with are simply astounding. And I know that they're going to bring a lot of people a lot of hope. Thank you so much for watching, and here's my conversation with Peter Panagore. Hello, this is Shannon Torrance, and you're watching Magic is Real. Today, my guest is Peter Panagore. I have just gotten halfway through his book, actually more than halfway today. He has written a beautiful book, and I'm not just saying that, it's beautifully written. It is called Heaven is Beautiful. This is a book about his near-death experiences. He's had two of them. Peter has also written a book called 2 Minutes for God. He has a Master of Divinity from Yale. He's a speaker, a writer. He hosts different Zoom events. I'll let him tell you all about the wonderful things he does, but just wanted to mention a few of them. Peter, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm really, really glad to be here. Thanks.
Great. Well, I would like to start not from this book is so good. It's obviously your story. It's so fascinating and interesting, but I would like to start with who you are. Obviously, you're a human and a soul. And if that weren't awesome enough, you've also had these great experiences. But I'd love to know about who you are, what your background is, what you're comfortable sharing in terms of what your previous spiritual paradigm was, even as far back as childhood. I think I remember you saying something about a spiritual experience when you were younger. What was your religious background and that sort of thing? How did you see yourself in the world?
Well, I was raised in a religious family, but not obsessively religious. But it's going to sound like they were because I was raised in two churches. My dad was Greek Orthodox and my mom was Roman Catholic. And I attended both as I got older because I was the older Greek son. It was patriarchal in the culture. And so I was the boy who went to church with the dad. And so my sisters, not so much. But we were all went to Catholic church, so we were nominally Catholic and Orthodox, all that kind of thing. But my spiritual life really began when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I had an angelic experience where uh, I was raptured into heaven and told that I belonged to God and would work for God. And that's a very brief way of saying, and using concrete language that I'm sure creates images in the viewer's mind. But I can tell you that I have a hard time talking about it and describing it. Just like all the rest of heaven. Everything I would say about it is metaphor. And so it was an experience where I was in my body and out of my body at the same time. The angel, this intelligence that was powerful, was inside of me and surrounding me and outside of me, and it pulled me up into the divine presence. And that was like this long elastic band in the divine presence on one end and in my body on the other. And I could see my body and I could see myself from the outside in heaven in the divine presence. It was kind of, I was just a little kid. But when I was there, I had no brain, and I understood that I belonged to God. This God was my, and I use the word God, which is shorthand for me. It's not the old white man in the beard in heaven. It's the divine self that has no form and is ineffable. And so I'm in the presence of this divine form that's ineffable and speaks through this angelic form to me in the voice that's inside my body and outside my body, and says to me, you belong to me, and you will work for me. When it was over, I ran in the house and I told my mom, and my mom decided I would be a Catholic priest. I was like 5 years old. Oh, you're going to be a priest. You'll be a priest. And I'm like, I don't know. I just know that I belong to God. And so then, shortly thereafter, another year later, I had another experience, but this time was with an elephant, a little baby elephant that I now have summarized it was Ganesh, and so that's not very Christian. Um, and so, but it was full of wisdom and intelligence and beauty, and sh- had me. I glimpsed eternity, and it frightened me. The size of eternity frightened me. Infinity was too big for my little self. And after that, I'm being very cryptic and very um, brief about these experiences that I hopefully will be coming out in another year in another book. But when I was in high school, I took 3 hits of purple microdot mescaline, which is an ethnogen, and I took too much, and I did not expect what happened, but I was in the divine, it opened me up to the divine presence again, and I had this reawakening of the pervasiveness of God inside of all living matter. And and shortly after that, that same year, my senior year of high school, I my religion, I went to Catholic high school, all boys Catholic high schools. It was a jock prep school. And so uh, it, we took a religion class every year. We read a gospel. And so my senior year, we're waiting to graduate. And my religion teacher went on a retreat to a local monastery. And when he came back on this Monday, he suddenly surprised us by pulling down all the shades and wanting to teach us meditation. And he had gone on this retreat at an abbey called St. Joseph's Abbey, where the monks for a period of time had been studying Theravada Buddhism with a Buddhist group in central Massachusetts, kind of doing this monastic exchange and reinvigorating their practice of prayer. And they came up with this thing called contemplative meditation. And that's what he taught us. It has later been rebranded. They rebranded it as centering prayer. But at the time when I learned it, it was called contemplative meditation. It was just a repetition of uh, a prayer word, riding on your breath, like I describe it as a butterfly in your palm, riding gently, not grasping. And whenever your mind wanders, you go back to your word and you aim your heart at the divine. And so, because of these previous experiences, and because I had had a reawakening recently that I described a minute ago, I took to meditation right away. So in 77, I began my meditation practice and I stuck with it. So by the time 81 rolled around, I'd already been meditating on a daily basis because I found that that by diving inside myself, I could create a space of peace inside myself that I could then carry with me through the day. And so it changed my life. Meditation changed my life. And then dying, well, when I came back from my death experience and I looked back on that mescaline experience, I thought the comparison was like I'd gone to the greatest beach in the world that was endless sand, and the mescaline experience was like a thimble full of sand. It was like
Right.
so supercharged and powerful. Was dying, which I wouldn't recommend to people, by the way. It leaves you, it the at least for me, okay, I can only talk for myself, but my experience of coming back was very difficult. It's there's something to be said for being prepared for that kind of thing,
Yeah.
not being radically changed, not being radically changed. um, there's something to be said for being a normal person in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have two thoughts. One is I think it's interesting that you took mescaline and had this spiritual experience because so often we make fun of stoners or whatever that are like, dude, the universe is so vast. And we make fun of them. And it's sort of like, as a culture, I mean, and it's
Yeah,
this
yeah,
idea of, oh, they're kind of dumb and they're stoners. But it's kind of, isn't that funny that what if they truly are seeing into getting a little glimpse of that, when they're doing that sort of like a DMT sort of experience. And really, they are seeing into it, and really, they're wiser than all of us. So I think that's really interesting. And also, I think it's interesting that for whatever reason, it seems to have been your soul's path that you were to die and to come back.
It does. It does. And I wanna toss in here and say that there's been a 10-year study at John Hopkins University uh, using clergy people. There's been a clergy study at John Hopkins, rabbis and imams and reverends who've never had mystical experiences, and they've been giving them heroic doses of psilocybin, and they have discovered, and along with other things, people have probably been hearing about the uses of psychedelics with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and all these applications. Well, in another study, science is showing that the end of duality in a transcendental experience with lasting after effects similar to near-death experience, similar to, but not the same as, every mystical experience gives after effects. Um, that there is something to be said for this. Uh,
Yeah.
that's
I've
one thing.
I've watched a lot of ayahuasca documentaries and interviews and things like that. And I'm fascinated by it, wondering, are we, I believe that it's possible that we are seeing into that other dimension, but then, sometimes you wonder, like, or is it, or what does that really say? If the brain can be altered by a chemical, is it in our brain? I mean, it really,
Well, here's the thing. I just finished Dr. Bruce Grayson's
oh
book
yeah.
After. I
Hmm.
just read, and he talks a little bit about this.
Oh,
And
good.
what he says is that MRI studies show that the brain on psychedelics has less activity, not more.
Oh, interesting.
So it sort of dampens the brain down, which is I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think what he said was that that's an interesting thing. If it dampens the brain down, does that free the brain? Free the mind from the brain?
Yeah. I mean, I know that's a whole other topic, but
Totally.
in my
Right.
college years, I experimented with psychedelics as well, and
Sure.
remember thinking as I was watching a Bob Marley poster come to life. I was
Mm,
watching it, and I knew, I was like, that's just a poster, and I wasn't hallucinating to the point of thinking I was somewhere else. It was like, how is it that all the lions underneath him are starting to prowl? And he actually went and picked up the microphone in the poster and literally started singing and mouthing the words. And I'm watching it happen, going, how is my brain doing that? Because it's not even, it's so clear. It's more clear than
yeah.
anything around me. And so I'm fascinated by that topic, which I know is a whole tangent, but I also think it's really interesting, to hear Bruce Grayson say it and you say it too. I think I want to explore that so much more as well. So,
But back to
um,
the subject, we were.
yeah, but okay, so obviously you've had two near death experiences. So let's talk about the first one, because it's not just fascinating that you had this near death experience and what happened when you left your body. It's the story about what happened is like I said, I was at the edge of my seat reading it, because it's actually
Yeah.
an adventure, which is why I don't expect you to give us all the details, because I want everyone to read the book. But I think, in a nutshell, in itself, it's actually a really interesting story of survival and the human resiliency.
Yeah, you almost make me cry because it's still I thought in 2016 I went back to there, and I kind of uh, had a cathartic experience when I dealt with a lot of my trauma from that night. But basically, what happened to me is I died of hypothermia. I froze to death in a very difficult situation high in the mountains in Western Canada in the winter. And I made a mistake, and it cascaded. It's a, it's the, I hate to use this, 'cause I've never used this, the snowball effect,
Mhm.
because I don't know. I've never used that, probably because it's a
Too real.
colloquialism. But that's what happened.
Yeah.
I made one mistake that cascaded into a disaster. And the the drive for survival. That's really that was the thing that was most apparent to me. All besides the fact that every part of me hurt, because I was literally, my body was literally freezing. The was that I found inside myself this capacity, this thing that was deep inside me to stay alive. It was this driving force that was sort of living inside of me that I didn't know was there, and that I had access to it with my willpower. And the situation was that we had good reason to believe we were going to die that night, and we're not going to get out of the situation we were in. But we were going to die trying to get out of that situation. And it was awful. For years, the early videos that I made, quite a number of years ago now, whenever I told this story in front of an audience, I cried. I just couldn't help it, because not because I died, but because there was just so much trauma around that night for me. And it wasn't until 2016 when I went back there that where the spot, I could see the spot where I died. It's very, like I can see where it is, and it changed for me by going back there. And that I performed a little ritual, that that involved screaming, screaming a lot, and what used to be a dark space for me became a doorway back in from the light. And so I had a healing. Um, so now I'm in a better place with what happened that night. But that night, uh, so all week long, this is 40 years ago. All week long, my big toe, which got the brunt of it, but my big toe in particular, it's suddenly really not really halfway through my toe. I can't really feel it. Mostly, I could not feel the bottom of my toe, but now I'm like, okay, that's I still have physical problems from that night. It was such a terrible thing. So I'm not. I guess I could tell people that we were ice climbing, and it was my first climb. And I was a rock climber and a mountaineer and a backpacker, and I'd been on the National Ski Patrol. We'd gone snow caving for a week. I was not an inexperienced mountaineer. I was an experienced mountaineer. I'd been since I was 12 years old in the wilderness. And but I made a mistake, and the we got to the top of the climb at sunset, and the temperature dropped 30 degrees within a heartbeat, and hypothermia set in immediately, and we didn't have gear to spend the night, and we immediately knew that death was stalking us, because it was, you can't go down. You can't. We were stuck. We had to fight our way down the mountain. You can't walk down the path. There was no path down. It was a sheer cliff. And in the dark, we had to fight our way down in the dark, and keep our heads at the same time. No panicking, because panic will kill you. And so death was like right on my shoulder the whole time. And we fought our way down, rappel by rappel, and terrible things happened. And our brains got colder and colder, and we began to make less good decisions. And by the time we reached the last rappel, sometime before dawn, hours before dawn, I don't know because I didn't have a watch on, and we were on the last rappel, and the rope got jammed, and I couldn't get it free, and I that's where I died because I couldn't get the rope free. And in the last few minutes, I I went through the last stages of hypothermia, where I began to get hot. That's like third to last. And I unzipped my coat, and I mentioned before I was on the ski patrol, and I'd been a first responder, a wilderness first responder, and I know better. I knew better than to unzip my coat, but I didn't care. And so I was making irrational decisions, and I unzipped my coat, which was just a thin shell anyway. Um, but it more rapidly increased my death. It felt like all the blood had rushed from my extremities to my core, and I remember thinking, "Oh, I can afford to lose a hand. I can afford to lose an arm. I can live if I lose an arm. I'm so hot. So I unzipped my coat and then I began falling asleep. And I would collapse and stand up and fall asleep and collapse and stand up. And then I stood up this last time. And as I stood up this last time, I got tunnel vision. And I should stop and say that by this point, I knew my situation was dire and I was relaxed. My drive for survival, I'd given in. I hadn't, I didn't quit like fearfully. I just kind of, okay, I guess this is where I'm going to die. And I remember thinking there was this movie around that time called Little Big Man, and with Dustin Hoffman, and there was the the chief of the tribe where Little Big Man lived would often come out of his tent in the morning and say, "It's a good day to die." And I remember thinking, "It's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. It's beautiful here. Um, I can't. The moon had come up. I could see some distance now, and I was sad for my family, and I started thinking about the divine and realizing there was nothing I could do about it. And so then, the coat and the sleeping, and then start to get tunnel vision, where there's a big black circle around my vision that rapidly shrinks, like fade to black. And I watched this crazy thing happen where my vision got narrower and narrower and narrower and just went out. And when it went out, I was surprised to discover I was still conscious. I thought because recently I'd been unconscious. I would fall asleep and I'd go into sleep unconsciousness. But I was totally conscious, and I no longer could feel myself standing, and I knew I hadn't fallen, like collapsed and fallen asleep. And so I was confused about what was going on, and my vision became expansive, and I could see into a great darkness that 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 was wide and deep and far, far, far in the distance, like the most distant star on a pitch black night. One star, and it popped into existence, and it rushed toward me and expanded and filled the space between me and it. Um, Faster than the speed of light, faster than thought. It just, from this incredibly great distance, was suddenly in front of me and communicating to me directly into my being telepathically. I'm taking you. And I didn't want to go, and I didn't know what was going on. And so I tried to use my willpower to stop. No, no, you're not. And yes, yes, I am. And just pulled me out of myself. I was completely powerless. And I had this great sense of the greatness of this entity, that this entity was intelligence, and was the same. And after the fact, I can look back and think, I know this is the same angel that took me the first time. But when I was dying, I was so overwhelmed by what was coming toward me that I just refused to connect the two experiences. But once I was taken, I was enwrapped in intelligence and compassion and love and contentment. And I was like a rag doll being carried. I had no power at all. I was just being carried. I couldn't change anything. I could just rest inside. And so I rested inside, and I was carried rapidly, and I'm still in this great expanse. And it's not, people describe they go into this narrow tunnel, but it was like the angel was the narrow tunnel. I can't, it's like, but I was still in the midst of this great expanse. It was this sort of this containment narrowing and great expanse at the same time. And I was carried this incredible distance, and at the speed of thought, I guess. And for lack of another way of talking about it. And I should stop and say that all language about the divine is metaphor. It has been metaphor. It always will be metaphor. Simile, metaphor, allegory, mythology, myth rather, and negation. Those are kind of that's kind of the tool set of mystics globally and forever in poetry. Um, and so everything I say is all kind of mixed in with that kind of language. So I got carried great distance in comfort, content. And either this entity, this angel, this intelligence, which is all powerful and all intelligent, either it deposited me, it's sort of like through a barrier into another darkness, a greater darkness, or it became that darkness. I'm not really sure. Whether it expanded itself into the infinite itself, or it melded into it. It's all this paradox and gray areas of it was this thing and it was that thing, and these two things aren't supposed to exist in the same space, but they do. And so I'm in the midst of this infinite darkness that I can see in. So it's pitch dark, but yet it's not dark like the room you're in when you shut the windows and the curtains and you shut off the lights on the outside and on the inside and you can't see your hand. If I had a hand, I could have seen it even though it was dark. But I didn't have a hand because I didn't have a body. And I could see myself from the inside as an orb of consciousness. And I say an orb, but y- maybe I was oblong shaped. I don't know. I was just sort of my thinking was my being, was myself, was my sensory perception. And so I could see this darkness, but also I could see in every direction at once. And I was content with myself, remembering this is who I am. I can keep rattling on here if you want me to,
No,
Shannon.
that and I'm absorbing that. I've heard this from so many near-death experiencers too that you did put into words so beautifully because from what I understand, it's so far beyond anything that we can comprehend here because here we have outlines and borders and boundaries and time and all these things, bodies. So we're kept into little containers of time and of physical form and atoms and molecules. And on the other side, everything is everything else and there is no time and everything is one and you are me and I am you and it makes perfect sense even though it's so hard to comprehend. So I really appreciate your description of it. And it just made me remember that first of all, as you were describing that struggle for survival, the whole time I'm listening to your book, I'm going, I would have just been like, forget it, I'm out. But I think when you're in that circumstance, you find a strength that you didn't even know you had. Because I just keep thinking, no, it's too much. I would have just given up. But I just had a remembering of probably like 10 years ago. I had endometriosis. I was in a lot of pain. I I took ibuprofen and then I took an Aleve together, which I didn't know you're not supposed to do. And that's all it was. I bad pain. I was, shaking from pain. So I said, I've got to take one, but I have to go to work. So I took them both. And I got up to go to the sink. And all of a sudden, what you described, I mean, I didn't fully cross over, but what you described sounds exactly what I saw. It was like, it wasn't the tunnel. That blackness that I was standing there and just all of a sudden everything went numb. Like I started to tingle and it was like this light, it was like a darkness enveloped me, but it wasn't scary. It was just sort of like this, like you said in your book, nothingness. You said it's no thing. It's like
No thing.
no thing. And it just kind of like, and I literally, my thought wasn't, oh my God, my thought was, oh, well, I guess I'm dying. I just remember thinking, I
Yeah.
was so chill about it. I'm like, I guess this is how I die. There was no fear at all. And then I threw up. And so that kind of aborted the whole thing, which is great. But looking
Just
back, I'm like, I think I really was dying for a
on your
second.
way.
I was for a second because I really remember I felt like I was going like this. Like life was just sort of like I was falling away from it. But it was a total sense of peace, like, all right, I'm going. That's beautiful. Yeah, and is there anything well, I guess, there's also how you came back into your body, but I just hadn't wanted to interrupt your beautiful description. Um, what was sort of the next thing you would say happened if you can put it into a next
Well,
thing or what happened next for you?
when I had a, I, I put it in a sequence because I have to talk about it, but it's
Yeah.
all at once. Everything happens at once. And I I was in nothingness. That's you mentioned that word, and I want to come back to that word for a second because I was no thing, and there were no things there. There was nothing there, and because so people ask, well, what was it like? Well, how do you describe no thing? Everything is the thing. Everything in the world is the thing. Everything's got a name. Everything's got a definition. And but there are no things there, and no language, no nothing. But it's not an emptiness. It's a fullness. It's paradox. And so I a portal opened, a doorway, a gateway, whatever you want. And it was gigantic, bigger than me. And I could see through the doorway, but the doorway was translucent and transparent and solid. It had this flow to it, and I could see the flow, and I could see into the flow, and I could see through the flow. And I could just see that it was all these things all at once, and there was a much longer tunnel on the inside, another tunnel that went into infinity. And I was attracted to this because it was this like a pearlescence, luminous flow. And so I wanted this thing. It was so attractive. And I went to it and I touched it with my being, unafraid, wondering, but unafraid. And as soon as I touched it, it inflowed into me. And then all these things happened at once. I saw myself as a creature. I heard a voice speak inside me that had no sound and no words, and I was surrounded and enveloped. I was in the ocean and the ocean itself at the same time, a portion of it, and yet the bigger part surrounded me. And I saw my creation. I saw the origin of my soul self. I saw the length of my soul life. I saw other lives I had lived. I understood that I had been fully known forever and ever, and that nothing about me was unknown, and that I was beloved, and that I went through I went through a hell of my own making. I went through a judgment of myself. I judged myself. My life review was to go through all of the pain I gave away to everyone in my life and experience it from their perspective, like I was in their body, feeling their feelings, looking at me doing this nasty thing to them, and also in my body at the same time, witnessing from my side all of the things I had forgotten that I had done to them, and all of my reasoning for doing whatever it was in a sequence of events, every bad thing I ever did, all in a sequence of events, times uh, 10,000 times. Every bit of pain that I gave away was magnified from their point of view when I was in them. And I judged myself as guilty for having caused so much pain because I was also being infilled with beauty. So there was so much beauty and love. My comparison wasn't to my comparison of my action was set against the voice that was speaking inside me saying, I love you. I know you. I've always known you. You're my beloved. And so I, and then I saw all of the love that I had given away in my life, I still had, and all the love that had been given to me, I still had. And I saw all of humanity's sins, the the bad karma that they was not their fault, that including me, we didn't create the matrix in which we live. We are creatures as part of creation, and everything that lives hurts something else. Everything that lives consumes something else, and that consumption extends to the wounding of others. And even though I was guilty, I judged myself guilty for having caused pain out of my own egoistic desires. I didn't build the structure, and I was still the beloved child. And I was being told and so I saw this equality of all humanity. I saw an equality of all of our brokenness. That there was no one person's action was more harmful or hurtful than any other person's action. in comparison to infinite love. So it may be on a human scale. Uh, there's a painful action number one, and then there's the maximum there's a 10. But when the maximum of love is a gazillion, bazillion, trillion, it makes the 10 nothing in comparison. And
That's the
so the
best thing I've ever heard about that concept. Just the way that you explained that just was like a light bulb. Keep going. I just wanted to say that that makes so much sense.
so as long as I was judging myself against myself, I was in a fiery hell of my own making. But as soon as I turned toward the love, as soon as I listened to the voice speaking inside me, I love you, I know you, I forgive you, I love you. As soon as I listened to that voice with the ear of my soul, I was infilled with healing and wholeness, forgiveness, beauty, mercy, joy, knowledge, understanding, bliss, paradise, wellness, awe, adoration, peace, beauty, all these things as one thing. That we, in our lives, there are all these separate things, but they're one thing. And all of it just infilled me to this place where if more of it had filled me, I would have obliterated. And and I said, "Am I dead?" And the voice said, "Yes, you're dead." And I said, "But I haven't, gone through the tunnel yet. I haven't gone all the way yet." And the voice said, "No, you haven't gone all the way yet, but I want you to come. It's time for you to come." And I said, "But my parents, I want to come, but I've got something going on earth with my parents suffering." Um, and in an instant I was carried across at the speed of thought again to the edge of heaven, where the our universe is created. So it's not like the Big Bang I'm talking about here, but I'm talking about the divine presence that is inside of all things. And so I was at the very edge of heaven, and the edge of the universe, and was enveloped in love, looking down on earth, and I could see like a hologram of earth and all the 7 billion people, everybody all at once, not like there's Joe and there's Mary and Ahmed is over there. It's more like I could see everybody all at once. I had supervision, and I could see everything that they were doing, and I could see that they were covered in a veil, and I could see that they could not see what I could see. They could not see the divine love. And as I watched this, the divine love expanded into was, is, and always will be infinite love, like just that I had always been measured by this love that created me, that is inexplicably infinite. And the voice said to me, "In the way that I love you now, I have always loved you, was, is, and always, and I love every single person just like you. You are all," using Christian language again, "you are all the prodigal child. You are all the one I love, most in particular, every 7 billion of us. And that when they die, when everyone dies, they will see what you see." And I saw my parents' faces in particular, and I saw I could see their accumulation of suffering. I could see their current suffering. I could see their future suffering without me, and I could see their future suffering with me living. And I was told that I should stay because in the wink of an eye, I could see that the length of my human life was the wink of an eye, and that in a wink of an eye, my parents would be dead and would be joining me in bliss and paradise, and all would be well. But I also knew that in their temporal world, that it was going to seem like an eternity to them, and that they would continue. They would have lost two kids. My sister had vanished, run away, my family lived that out as mourning for someone who is gone from you as if a death. And so I said, "But do I have to stay here?" And the voice said, "No, you don't have to stay here." I said, If I go back to life, can I come back here to this infinite love? And the voice said, yes, but I want you to stay. I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. And on my way, it showed me a million different entry points into my life again. And in the center of this million different points, like a circle, was a pure beam of white light. And that it radiated out into fading darkness, but there was no darkness. It was just less light to the very edges of all these individual entry points. So there was a million entry points in this one circle. This is all metaphor, and I had to choose. The voice says to me, choose, like choose one of these paths. And so I like, I want to be a writer. I want to be a creative. I want to live bohemian. I want to, and like in an instant, I had a path, and it was not into the center where I felt like the the divine wanted me to go, but gave me the choice to do what I wanted to do. And so I went off, not to quite to the center, but to the side of the center, in the light, but not in the intensity of it. And the next thing I knew, I felt like I was being crushed down because I was 10,000 times bigger. I was being like a compact, and I felt like I was being screwed back into my body again, like painfully screwed back in. And I was inside this very small, like in, Aladdin, uh you know itty bitty bottle. I was like in this itty bitty thing, so much smaller and full of pain. And my first rise to consciousness was suffering. I was just racked with pain because I'd forgotten suffering. I'd also once I was filled with bliss, there was no more suffering. All suffering had ended. And so I got upset when I finally, within a couple of days of this, I realized that I didn't realize the deal that I had made, that I was going to be having to live back inside the suffering again, which, maybe if I, but I couldn't remember suffering. So I
And I've heard that from other people too. In fact, my last guest Felice described it the same way. It's, yeah, you're being squeezed back into this tiny little vessel when you're so expansive. And that's, I feel like even if you didn't have the physical pain that you have when you have hypothermia, I think even the littlest pain would seem enormous after what you just went through. And after that feeling of total freedom from anything physical, that you could have a scratch and it would still feel big. But obviously you were in rough shape. And again, I want readers to read how you kind of were saved and got back to safety, which is really, again, just when I'm reading the book, I'm going, oh my gosh, oh, finally, it's like, I'm really rooting for you to get him back, get him back to civilization and get him into a blanket. But I know that that's really difficult, after feeling what you felt and hearing what you heard. But what really struck me too, when I was listening to the book today, were two things. When you talk about the life review, as some call it, that was your hell. And I've had this conversation a lot lately with people, because so many people have different ideas about what, I don't personally believe in hell. I believe in different states of consciousness and vibration levels. So, um, and that you kind of make your own hell in your own reality. Um, but I also loved what you kind of heard there too, was that in your life review, you see all the quote unquote bad things you did. Whereas on the other side, there's not as much of a judgment on what's good or bad. It just
Yeah,
is.
God didn't judge me.
No. And it's just the way humans are. We're fallible. That's why we come here to learn. So if we wouldn't be sent here if we weren't meant to make mistakes and learn from our mistakes. So um, I think it's hard for us to comprehend as human beings, because we all have, anyone with a conscience who's not a sociopath or has any kind of, inability to feel that, we feel guilt. We're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I wish I hadn't done that. And sometimes it doesn't even occur to us how we might have hurt somebody without realizing it, or not even realized how much we hurt them. Like maybe we broke up with someone and we were kind of just like, we didn't realize they cared so much. So I just would love to hear you kind of your response to that. It's not a question as much as just a discussion point that I think
Mm.
it's really incredible that as human beings, we can't imagine, well, how could we be shown these things but not judged for them? It's not a judgment. It's just a look at it.
Look at it. This is what you did.
Hmm.
This is what you did. And the other language I use to describe it comes from Catherine of Genoa in the 1500s. She describes her mystical experience, not a near death experience, but a mystical experience. Near death experience is a type of mystical experience, but she didn't die to have hers. She describes it as the purgative fire of divine love. I was cleansed by this. I was cleansed by this of things that I could not bring with me. I wonder if I had clung to them, whether I would have gone on. But it was so self-evident. The divine was self-evident. It wasn't like I had to force myself to turn toward the love. It was self-evidently love, and what else could I do? I was overwhelmed by its beauty. And so I was cleansed. I was released from these chains that I had forged for myself, to steal from Charles Dickens. Christmas Carol. I had created this, and that I didn't need it anymore. I left it behind. It had to be removed from me, and I was given the opportunity to remove it. And I was freed from it. And I expect, okay, so I expect that my next trip, maybe 3 times a charm for me, maybe I get to stay next time, um, is that I might have to go through that again. I've lived a human life since then, and I've hurt people since then. And if that's what it takes for me to enter into bliss, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Count on
funny.
me.
When I hear about other people's life reviews, it kind of makes me go, oh no, I already know what I'm going to see. But then I realize it's okay though. You've already done the work to forgiveness, forgiving yourself, making amends wherever you can. I've done that process and I'm try to be very aware, but there's still that human part of me that's like nervous to see it again because I'm like, I've already worked through it. Do I have to see it again? But I know that that's all part of it.
It
And
is,
that
and
when
it's
you're,
much more in detail.
yeah, and you're not feeling bad when you're watching it, right? Where were
I
you?
felt I felt pain. I didn't feel
Good.
badly. I felt pain. I felt the other person's pain. I
Yeah.
felt their emotions. I felt their emotional pain times 10,000. That was overwhelming to me,
Yeah.
which produced inside of me. So I had this dual experience. These two things were going on at once. I witnessed all of my reasons for causing their pain, and not just my reasons, but my emotional state,
Mhm.
what I was feeling to cause their pain. But their pain was so much bigger than anything I felt.
Yeah.
And and it was obvious to me that it was all unnecessary. That's the thing of it, is that I didn't have to hurt a single person. But it was easy to see that in heaven. It's much harder to see it here.
Yeah.
So I forgive. So I live my life differently. Since that day, I live my life differently. I know that I hurt people. That's just what it is to be a human being. I don't do it intentionally, but sometimes it just happens. You make a mistake, or you get angry, or whatever it is going on. Because I'm still a very much a human being. Um, but I live aiming my heart at compassion and kindness and peace, so that I can be a channel of that into my own life. So I cause as little damage as I possibly can. Because there's this story from the third century in Egypt, from the Desert Fathers. There was a contemplative movement in the third century in Christianity outside of Egypt, and there was a bunch of monasteries in the desert. And then there's this story of this monk who would come into the city every day, and everybody venerated this guy because he was like the holy man. And one day he shows up and he's got a sack of sand on his shoulder, and he cuts a little hole in it, and he spends his whole day walking all over the city, not talking to anybody, walking all over the city, till he had this huge crowd following him, wondering what the monk is doing. And finally, when the bag is empty at sunset, he finally turns to them, and someone says, "What were you doing all day, you crazy old man?" And he said, "Those are my sins pouring out behind me. Me, the holy man, me, the holy man, have my sins pouring out behind me." And so I live my life knowing that cause pain everywhere I go. I expect to go back through, in biblical language, the fire. In Eden, in the mythology of Genesis, God puts a cherub at the gate of Eden with a flaming sword to keep everybody out. I expect to go back through the flaming sword again, and I expect to be cleansed by it. And I expect to be, I was told, I was promised that I will be in the divine presence again. And so that my beloved, I came back, I came back with a beloved. I have a beloved. I only have one beloved, and that's the divine. That is the holy of the holies, the source of all being, the luminous pearlescence, the energy of all there is, the all in all, the isness, whatever you want to call it, that's my beloved. And my heart, as long as I aim my heart and my life toward that, I'm okay. No matter what happens, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is basically how you live differently now. But I would also like to hear about, you know, few people have near death experiences one time, much less two times. So can you take us to the second time?
Sure.
How many years later was this approximately? I know it was,
2015. And the
that's right.
first one was 2000. Pardon me. The first one was 1980. And I came back from the 1980, like most near death, or probably all near death experiences, unafraid of dying, unafraid of death, zero fear of death, nothing, not afraid at all. And so I would tell, once I came out of the near death closet, I couldn't shut up about it. But I kept my mouth shut for 20 years, but sewed my lips shut. But once I was out, I just started saying, yeah, I'm just not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of dying. And then so 2015 rolls around and I'm living where I live. Um, Short story is I was going to go sailing, solo sailing. I had a sailboat at the time and I was going to go down out and I live on the ocean. And so I was going to go sailing, but the fog rolled in, thick fog, and I was like, I'm not going sailing. So I go to yoga class. So I'm a yogi. I've been a yogi for 40 years, and so I go to yoga class. I get there late because I was going to go sailing, and I show up, and the place is summertime and close to Maine, and so there's a lot of vacationers and summer people, and there's really no room for me in the studio. But the teacher's a friend of mine, and she sets me up in the doorway. So she opens the door, and I'm actually in the hallway looking into the room with my mat sticking 6 inches into the room. And everybody's doing hot yoga. So, and it's a hot summer's day, and she's got the heat on, and it's hot in there. And I'm not a big fan of hot yoga because when I practice yoga, my prana rises anyway. So I get hot just by my practice in a cold room. So I was in downward dog, which is 2 minutes into practice, and I thought, God, I'm really, really, really hot. Why am I sweating so much? Oh, and I should say that I ran 5K the day before. So I'm a runner, I'm a cyclist, I'm like into fitness, partly because of my near death experience. I decided to have as much fun as I possibly could while I'm alive.
Yeah.
Gonna use this body up. So um I'm like really hot, I'm really sweaty, I don't feel well. So I lay down on my mat and I'm sweating and sweating and sweating, and I'm lying there and I think, body inventory. Oh, my heart hurts. I'm having a heart attack. I
You.
have a family thing. There's a congenital thing in my family. Killed my grandfather, would have killed my father, but they life flighted him and shot him up with then uh, an experimental decoagulant. And it did eventually. His sister who ran away. She died now 7 years ago of the same thing. So a couple years before me. And so I was like, oh my God, maybe this is a minor thing and I'll just go outside and not bother all these people. So I go outside, I walk outside, I lie down, and I'm lying in the grass and I'm thinking, this is getting worse. I should get up and go to the urgent care center. So I go to sit up and I can't sit up and it hurts too much. And so I lay down and I'm like, today's the day. Today I get to go home. I've been praying. I prayed every day to go home. Dear God, take me home today. Or is my job done yet? Can I go? Can I get out of here? Whatever the prayer was, I'm always like, get me out of here. And today was my day, and so I was like kind of happy about it. But I have two kids and a new granddaughter, and I'm married, um, and time goes by, and out walks the yoga teacher, who's a friend of mine, and she says, "Peter, are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, Romy, I'm dying. I'm having a heart attack." She said, "No, you are not. You know, you're like super fit." And I said, "No, Romy, I'm having a heart attack, and I've been out, and now it's probably 20 minutes into my heart attack, and you only get an hour." And so I convince her that I'm having this problem, and she said, "Call the ambulance." I'm like, "No, the ambulance is 3 miles away. I don't think I'm going to make. You know, they're going to have to get to the ambulance, and then they're going to have to get here, and I don't think it's. And then they're going to drive me upriver." 30 minutes to the hospital because we only have an urgent care center where we live, and they can't transport to the urgent care center. So I'm like, get a friend of mine who's in this class, and she comes out, and I convince her. It takes me 5 minutes to convince her that I'm dying. She not
Because
quite
you're
that
so
bad.
casual about it.
Well,
Everyone's
I'm
like,
like,
because you're just like, I'm dying, and everyone's like, get out of here.
how do you hear? You're not. And I'm like,
No, you're not.
and but they all know him, and by this point, everybody, my book hadn't come out yet. My book hadn't come out yet, but my dearer friends know that I'm a near death experiencer, but they don't have any idea what that means really. And so I get transported to the urgent care center with this friend of mine in the car, and I call ahead to the doc. And I live in a small town, and I know everybody. So I get to I get there, and the doc's like, "Before we get you out of the car, let's see how you are. Maybe you're not having a heart attack." I'm like, "No, trust me, this is serious. I'm now 30 or 40 minutes into this. I need you now." And so they bring me in, and I know all the nurses. They Some of them had been half the nurses or three-quarters of the nurses had been. I was a congregational minister. They'd all been members of the church, and I was hiding out in the church. I need to tell you, the congregation. I need to tell your audience that I hid in the church for 20 years so I could pursue my contemplative life in the public eye, and nobody would know that's what I was doing. I
Right.
was getting paid to pray, basically. And they shoot me up with a decoag. They give me an X-ray. They found that I have 100% blockage in my widowmaker artery, and that it's real. And they shoot me up with a decoagulant. Gives me a 3% trickle through. They offered me morphine because I live an hour and a half from the catheterization lab, and so I had to get in the ambulance and drive this hour and a half through traffic, and he's like, "I'll give you morphine." And I'm like, "No, I don't want morphine because it makes me sick. I'll be vomiting in the back of the ambulance and having a heart attack. Not a
Mm.
not a good idea." He said, "What are you going to do about the pain?" "I'm going to meditate with the pain." So meditation, you can control. I don't know if your folks know this, but you can control your physical pain with meditation. If you have a localized physical pain and you stare at it with your mind and your breath, as long as you're in meditation on that spot, you can rise above the pain no matter what it is. I suppose there's a point at which you can't, when your mind becomes jangled by the pain itself, then there's no way to do that. But there is a limit to it.
Yeah,
So
there
they
are
put me
women
in
in
the.
labor that use that technique as well. Um,
Oh,
I've heard of people using it for labor, for being in labor.
I haven't, but I'm glad to hear that because it works for sciatica too. It works for broken bones. It works for everything. But you have to keep your mind set on it. And as soon as you take your mind off it, you're back in pain again. And so that's the way it works. And this is a biological thing. It's not mystical. It's just the
Hmm.
way the mind works. And so they load me on the gurney, and my son shows up because he's living in town for the summer, and my wife's there. And he leans in and he squeezes my hand, looks me in the eye, and says, "I love you, Dad." And I can see this agony on his face. I can see this love and this care and this agony. And I look, and I'm being wheeled to the ambulance, and I look up at my wife, and she's like kind of looking at me like this kind of smile on her face, and I know that she's thinking that I'm leaving.
Hmm.
And I've been telling her for since our marriage began, the minute I get an opportunity to leave without killing myself, I'm out of here.
That must be
And
hard for her.
oh, yeah, not. Yeah, it's not been marrying a near-death experiencer is not an easy thing. We live in a different world than everybody else, and it's
Mhm.
not an easy thing. She's a saint, and for putting up with my eccentricities. And so basically, I'm out of here. So I'm in the ambulance, and I'm on my way to Portland. I live in Maine, and I'm not on morphine. I'm meditating in the back of the ambulance, and it's a Saturday, and it's summer traffic, and the sirens are going, and it's one point. I'm focused in my meditation, but in meditation you can hear everything that's going on around you. You just don't grasp it. You don't pull it into your conscious thought. You still hear it. So I hear the paramedic. She radios in and she says, "We're losing him. What do you want?" She's calling into the main medical center. What do we do? And I open my eyes and I look up at her, and she's got fear on her face. And as soon as she sees me looking at her, she goes back to game face because she's a professional and doesn't, so she knows her game. And I close my eyes because as soon as I open my eyes, I'm out of meditation, and the elephant that's standing on my chest, I suddenly can feel the elephant. And so now it's too much pain. So I go back into my meditation, and as I go back inside myself, I have no more pain, and I'm not meditating, and I'm not in myself anymore. I'm outside of myself in the tunnel, and I'm in the tunnel above myself. And my angel, this intelligent entity, this orb of consciousness, comes sweeping down toward me, this being of light communicating to me, "We love you. It's time to come home. Come home with us. We've been waiting for you." And so I start to go. I like connect up with this angel, but this time I'm aware of what's going on. I'm not like, "What's going on?"
Mhm.
So I'm going with this, and I thought, wait a minute, let me think about this. Let me make sure everybody's okay. So I turn away from the angel and I look down inside myself. And when I look down inside myself, I see my son's face looking like agony looking at me. And I know that he's not ready. I read his mind and soul, and I know that he's not ready for me to leave. He's ready to leave, like grow up and go off and be on his own. He's in his 20s, but he's not ready for me to leave him. And I think about my daughter, who's a couple years older, just left a marriage. Husband had gone to Afghanistan. Terrible things happened to him over there, and came back a different person. They had a brand new baby. She had just left him, and now so she's on her own with this new baby, and I know my wife's going to be fine. She's like expecting me to go, but my kids, they're not really ready for me to go. And so I turn back to the angel, and it starts to rush back down toward me, and I just turn away and go back into my body again. And I should say this: when I looked at my granddaughter, who was not even a year old at the time, I thought about her growing up without a father. Who's going to be the male in her life, the older male in her life? And it wasn't going to be her dad. It had to be me. And so it was for my son and for my daughter, but it was really for my granddaughter. And and now she's 6. I saw her this morning. She's in my life almost every day. And she's fabulous. And I'm the golden grandpa. They call me Bampa. Um,
Aw.
I'm I'm the one who can do no wrong in her life. Um, and so I went back into my body, and I get to the catheterization lab, and the doc's like, "He's not on morphine." I'm like, "Don't give me any morphine." And so and the surgery doesn't hurt. They put a stent in, and so I'm conscious through the whole surgery. I can feel them like poking around inside my heart with the orthopedic, arthroscopic, and uh, and then they take me to ICU, and I'm still not on any painkiller, and I meditate until I'm exhausted, and they give me something other than an opiate. I don't know what they gave me, but I finally, after 8 hours or 12 hours of exhaustion and surgery, I fall asleep, and then I wake up the next day, and I find out I get moved to a regular bed, and I find out that the doc at the urgent care center had told my son to say goodbye to me because I was going to die on the way. So what I saw in his face was agony of losing his dad, his last time to say goodbye. And And I had a lot of damage because it was 2 hours, more than 2 hours outside the goal. You get 1 hour in the golden hour before damage starts to happen to the muscle. So I had a lot of damage. I had a long recovery. My book came out when I was in the hospital.
Wow.
Amazon, my publisher, Hampton Roads, um, it was scheduled for release 30 days later, but Amazon had such a back order on it that they released it a month early. So I'm actually in my hospital bed when they release it. And I got totally twisted around again. Near death experience left me the first time living non-attached in the world, not
Mhm.
detached from the world, but non-attached in the world, and has lots of other after effects that are they're blessings, but they're also curses, because I'm like a balloon. I'm like a balloon that's always floating above reach of everybody. And it's and so the second time, I hid it for 20 years because I didn't want to be considered a kook. And I worked in religion. I'm not a religious person. I am a meditator and a yogi, and I have a master's in divinity from Yale and mysticism. I studied global mysticism in order to find language and practices that I could use inside myself to carve my way through striving back to heaven as best as I can while I'm here. And that's how I've lived my life. Um, Privately, every day, meditating, doing yoga. And as a minister, I was a minister for 20 years and 18 years, and nobody questioned me when I was, he's in there meditating. Oh, it's okay. He's a minister. So nobody, if I were like an architect and I was meditating in the middle of the day, they would have fired me.
Right.
But so I kind of adjusted. I had other mystical experiences as a result of my near-death experience and my meditative life, which continued to um, heal me and also give me new understanding of what had happened to me in my NDE, but also additional understanding about um, the nature of reality. And and then my second near-death experience twisted me pretty seriously. I, in a way that I didn't expect. I'd been on. I'd left the church after 18 years, and I was in television for 15 years. Television and a little bit of radio, which is where this mic comes from. I had a radio show in addition to the TV. I had a daily TV spot on a couple of NBC stations in Maine, telling spiritual devotional stories just before the weather. And after 15 years, while I just got out of the hospital, new corporate owners came in and bought the station, and we're getting phased out. So I got canceled. And so I had this year and a half of this long, slow canceling as we were easing the audience into the idea that we were going away after 90 years. So I had this thing for 15, but it was 90 years old. And so I decided that I was gonna. The book came out. I started touring. I started speaking all over the place, national, international speaking events and publications and all sorts of things started happening. Uh, there's a. I'm in a video. In a movie on a documentary right now on Amazon Prime, and my book is being made into a feature film, and all these things started happening, and I decided that I was all in now. As a result of my second death, I'm 100% in. I've got a limited amount of time left. It could be 30 years, but I know that it's the wink of an eye.
Mhm.
And so my and there are and I've discovered in 2015 that there are tens of millions of near-death experiencers. I thought I was alone. For my whole life, I thought I was alone. And then I found the International Association for Near Death Studies, and I found a peer group. And then I discovered that we're all over the world, and we're in every culture and every language, and we're all coming back with the same message of love. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Jan or a Sikh or an atheist, it doesn't matter. And maybe we use different metaphorical terms to describe it, but the love itself that we experienced is the operating system of, it's our new operating system. I have my OS in my computer of my body is love. And after my second near death experience, I decided that I'm all in now. I'm not gonna, I pretended I passed for 20 years in the church pretending that I was a believer. I am not a believer. Mythologies are mythologies. They're useful tools, but they are not the thing itself. And I used all of those tools to deepen the path inside myself to aim my inner eye at the oneness of being. And and now that I've done that for 40 years, I finally feel like I'm ready. This new second near death experience, now that I feel like I'm prepared to finally begin to do the work that I was always meant to do. Because when I died, the second day after my death, the first day was the day that the first sunrise was the day we got off the mountain. The second sunrise, I heard the voice inside me, still hear the voice inside me, calling me to speak that which has, for which there are no words. And so I've spent my life um, trying to channel peace, not so much so that I can just fill myself, but so that I can fulfill my duty, which is to bring as much as I can into the world through this vessel. Because I know that I'm not this person. I live inside this body. Peter is my character here, but it's not who I am. And I aim to carve away enough of Peter to allow enough of my true self in and let that flow through me and let that speak instead of me. So I use lots of words, but one of the things I learned in television is, and I kind of did this in the pulpit as well, but particularly in television and radio as well. Um, if I was meditating before I wrote my scripts, I prepared things. So I prepared these little 240 word stories, and then I would read them off the teleprompter. But if I meditated before I wrote them, and I meditated before I shot the recording in the studio, I could project the light itself. I could weave the light into the words, and I could gather the light inside myself and send it out through my eyes into the lens and out through my throat chakra into the voice, into the microphone. And I never told anybody that I was doing this because who's going to believe me? So I just kept my mouth shut about it. And I began to get letters from um, all sorts of people of all walks of life, because my audience was everybody, in the state, of all walks of life, saying that they s- they would there was something about me, something about my words, and something about the way that I made them feel. And I knew that it wasn't me. It's not me. It's this light that is inside of everyone already. This divine presence sees itself. It recognizes itself when it encounters itself in another. And if I can make myself small enough, if I can die enough to myself in this life to let enough of this through me, then people see it inside themselves. And once you see it inside yourself, then you begin to see it everywhere. And you realize that it is in everything, and that you are the doorway in. That the way into the divine self is already inside you, and you don't need anybody else. And you only need to look inside. And when you begin to look inside and peel away the self, you then begin to find it in there, and then you begin to see it in everywhere you go. In nature, I'm very much a nature mystic, because nature speaks the voice of the divine through every single leaf and tree, every root and rill. And it, the deeper you go inside yourself, the more that becomes real. And the more time you spend in nature, listening to the divine presence in nature, the more that becomes real inside of you. It's this self-reinforcing system, and we just need to tap into it. Um, and so that's really what I'm after for the rest of my life, is to try to teach people how to find this inside themselves.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons I'm doing this project. And because I do think it's important to share this with people who are receptive. I know there will be people who aren't. But as you said, I also appreciated so much how you said that it isn't all, it is a gift, because then suddenly you see that, oh, maybe I don't need to take everything so seriously or be so afraid, because now I see that this, like you said in the book, it's a wink of an eye. And when you said that in the book, it actually kind of for a second made me feel kind of depressed, which is weird because on one hand, I mean, this is the stuff that brings me alive and that makes me feel so much joy to know that there's even because, even just through what I've done, which is learn mediumship and connecting with the other side, I'm starting to feel that too. Like suddenly I'm like, everything that's happening, I don't want to be so in the clouds that I'm not present in this world. So I can understand that to a smaller degree, because already I'm starting to feel like I'm sort of like having trouble relating with people, even just having this new knowledge. But I think it's really important that you're saying it, that one of the traumas of having that beautiful awakening, which is to understand that we're just here to learn and that it is all going to be okay. Because at the end of the day, no matter how we pass, once we're there, it's just like a blip. This is all just a blip. Not that it's not meaningful, but that this isn't the real reality. So,
Right.
but I think it's important that you talk about the trauma of that because, as you said, and I was going to say this too, doing this, work that I'm doing, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who have experienced what you have. But there's this, at least in here, I can't speak for all cultures. There's this, I think we're really getting there. I think more and more people are open, but there's this idea that it's like woo woo or, we're crazy. And so people are afraid to speak up when really, what's up. I mean, and I think that, it there's a reason why you had visitations when you were a child, because this was your work. And so for you to hold that in, you're really going against your own soul and what I think, God, the universe, whatever you call it, wants for you, because that's why they were saying, hey, we're here, we're just letting you know we're here. And it's the same reason why when I was a kid I saw a big blue orb appear over my body when I turned off the
Mm,
light when I was 14 or
mm,
around that age. And later in my life, I worked in casting and I was working on a paranormal show thing. And I talked to this psychic medium and I said, what was this thing that appeared to me? It just was a big blue orb that just zipped across. I've talked about it before, my room, and it hovered and it looked at me and it kind of just like, it was as bright as it was this bright. It was brighter than this. It was glowing. And I saw it with my naked eye. I was completely sober. I mean, I might have been 13, 14. And she said, oh, that was angels coming to show you that they were real so that later in life you were meant to do some kind of work. And at this time I did not even have I was interested, but I didn't know that I had the capability to learn. And they said that was them showing themselves to say, so later on, when you were like, is this real? You'd be like, nope, I know it is. And it sounds like you are doing the work that you were meant to do, because that's why they kept showing themselves to you to say, kind of, this is your job in this lifetime. And you are doing it so well. Like I said, your book is beautifully written. Everything you just said, every time I think, oh, every interview I do, I'm like, this is my favorite. This is my favorite. And now I'm here going, this one's my favorite, because everything you said resonated so much. And I think it will with so many people. It will also open up some minds. And also, it will be comforting to other people and give other people the courage to say, this happened to me too.
that's the
And
thing right there.
know where to go for support, because it is hard to live in the
Hmm.
world after you've been
Yeah.
to the other side. How do you adapt to, like we said, the tangible?
Hmm.
And how do you
And you
kind of
have
shrink
to.
yourself? You have to kind of shrink yourself. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think it's beautiful. And I appreciate so much you sharing your time and energy and all of the wisdom. I feel like, if I just let the camera roll for 5 hours, I could just listen to you, listen to you speak. But in the interest of, people not going off to do other things, I think that's I'd love to just end with um, just some words of wisdom that you have for people. I think anything that comes to mind that you just really want people to know.
A couple things. One, it came to mind as we were talking that I heard a quote this week: "Before enlightenment, wash the dishes." After enlightenment, wash the dishes. So it doesn't, and the other one I heard this week was the good news is that you don't need perfection in order to have an awakening. And the bad news is awakening doesn't lead to perfection.
That sounds about right.
But
Yep.
the what I really want to say is love really is the treasure. Love is the treasure of life. Love is the treasure of heaven. It's the giving away of love that gets you to gain it, and the sharing of it changes everything. It changes everything. If you aim your heart at the divine with all of your heart, soul, and mind for the whole of your life on a regular basis, daily, a little bit every day, your heart will expand. Your heart will expand, and your self interest will shrink, and you'll live a better life because the light isn't ours. Love isn't ours. There's this great storehouse of love. It's an inexhaustible supply, and if you open yourself to it, the more you open, the more you get to give away, the more capacity you have. It's beautiful.
You literally just almost made me cry for the first time ever while I was doing this. So thank you so much. That really moved me a lot. And I just can't thank you enough for doing the work that you're doing. I would like you to share your website. I'm also going to link it below, but I know it has all of your information because you do offer counseling. You do have your where to find your books, and I know that you do some Zoom meetups too with a very affordable donation amount, suggested. And so please let us know what your website is so people can learn more about you and be involved.
It's peterpanagore.love.
Dot love. How did you
peterpanagore.love.
get that?
I know, it's crazy. It's
That's so
available. peterpanagore.love, and I have a YouTube show called Not Church on Sunday mornings. It's no doctrine, no dogma, no BS, just mysticism. And I teach meditation. Just started my first workshop with the New Earth Organization Network, NEO Network, just this past week, teaching a form of Kriya Yoga, which is a out of Paramahansa Yogananda's Self-Realization Fellowship School. I am not officially ordained by them, but I've been practicing for 40 years. Long story, beautiful story, but a long story. But I waited until others saw that it was working before I decided to teach, and now I've begun to teach.
fantastic. And guess who's going to be at your not church?
Oh, oh.
I'm definitely there. Thank you so much again, Peter Panagore, for being with me today and for sharing all this beautiful wisdom with our viewers. Really means a lot.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
My absolute
Peace.
pleasure. You too.